She trusted them with her life, but they were hiding a secret that would destroy everything. How far would someone go to control the truth? And how much would you lose before you even realized it? In one house, love turned into fear, loyalty into betrayal, and one night, a decision would be made that no one could escape. The Whitman house always sounded hollow in the early mornings. Laura Whitman noticed it most when she woke before dawn, lying still as if any movement might wake the walls themselves. The silence pressed against her ears, heavy and deliberate, like it was hiding something. Even the clock in the hallway ticked softly, as though it feared being heard. She sat up slowly, one hand pressed to her chest, waiting for the familiar wave of exhaustion to pass. Lately, her body felt like it belonged to someone else. Simple movements left her breathless. Her skin felt warm even in winter, her thoughts fogged, her sleep restless. She told herself it was stress. New marriages came with adjustments. That was normal. Mark Whitman was already gone. His side of the bed was cold, perfectly made, as if he had never slept there at all. Laura found that unsettling. Mark was attentive in public, gentle in his words, but distant in the quiet hours. He preferred early mornings, long drives, and locked doors. She told herself she loved his independence. She had chosen this life. Downstairs, the house smelled faintly of antiseptic, a sharp, clean scent that never seemed to fade. Laura paused in the kitchen, gripping the counter as dizziness swelled. On the refrigerator hung a handwritten schedule in Evelyn Whitman's precise script. Times, meals, appointments. Evelyn believed order kept families together. Laura poured herself water and watched her hands shake. She remembered Evelyn insisting on separate cups, separate towels, separate shelves in the medicine cabinet. At the time, it had felt controlling, almost obsessive. Now, the memory made her throat tighten. Nothing in this house was shared without permission. She wondered briefly if she had ever truly been alone here, or if every step she took had already been measured and observed. The thought lingered longer than she liked. Laura rarely saw her stepmother-in-law before noon. Evelyn lived upstairs, behind a door that remained closed more often than not. When they did cross paths, Evelyn's eyes lingered too long, assessing rather than greeting. It made Laura feel like a guest in her own home. She opened the living room curtains, letting pale light spill across polished floors. Family photos lined the mantel. Mark and Laura on their wedding day. Evelyn standing slightly apart, unsmiling. Laura studied her own face in the pictures, noticing how much brighter she had looked only months ago. Her phone buzzed, a reminder she didn't remember setting. Doctor, 10:30 a.m. Laura frowned. She had canceled that appointment weeks ago, or at least she thought she had. Confusion tightened her stomach. Later that morning, while searching for her passport in the study, Laura found the drawer that didn't belong. It was locked, but the key rested nearby, careless, waiting. Inside were neatly stacked papers, medical forms, lab results, envelopes stamped confidential. Her hands trembled as she read. Dates she didn't recognize. Tests she never consented to. Then she saw it. Her name, printed clearly. Laura Whitman. Diagnosis confirmed. A cold awareness settled into her bones. Heavier than fear, sharper than pain. Whatever this was, it had been planned, controlled, and hidden deliberately from her. She felt watched. Not by accident. The house remained silent as her breath broke apart. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Someone was awake. Above. Laura did not confront Mark immediately. Fear made her careful. She returned the papers to the drawer, locked it, and spent the rest of the day moving through the house as if nothing had changed. Every sound now felt intentional. Every glance carried weight. The creak upstairs never came again, but its memory followed her. Mark came home just after sunset, calm and smiling, carrying groceries like any other evening. He kissed her cheek and asked about her day. Laura studied his face closely, searching for cracks. She saw none. His normalcy felt rehearsed. At dinner, Laura tested the truth gently. She mentioned feeling unwell, asked if he remembered her canceling a doctor's appointment. Mark barely looked up. He said stress did strange things to the body. He reminded her she worried too much. His voice was soft, almost soothing, and somehow that made it worse. Later, in the bedroom, Laura pressed harder. She asked if there was anything about his family she should know. Mark laughed quietly, brushing her hair back. He said every family had quirks, secrets that weren't worth digging up. He told her trust meant letting the past stay buried. As he slept, Laura lay awake, replaying moments she once dismissed. Mark insisting they move into his childhood home. Evelyn's immediate authority over the household. The way Mark avoided questions about his first years with his stepmother. None of it had felt dangerous then. Now it felt deliberate. In the days that followed, Mark became more attentive. He cooked. He canceled meetings. He watched her closely, as if monitoring something unseen. Laura wondered if guilt could look like care. She wondered how long he had been waiting for her to notice. One afternoon, Laura left the house without telling anyone. She walked into a small medical clinic across town, her heart racing with every step. She told the receptionist she needed a full screening immediately. No insurance, no shared records, just answers. The nurse avoided her eyes. The doctor spoke carefully, choosing words that softened nothing. The results were not recent. The infection had been present for months, possibly longer. Long before Laura ever felt sick. She asked for copies of everything, her voice steady despite her hands shaking. The doctor hesitated, then printed the reports, sliding them across the desk like a confession. Dates, numbers, notes written by someone who had never met her. Laura folded the papers carefully and placed them in her bag, feeling the weight of them settle into her spine. Outside, the sun felt too bright, the world moving too fast. She sat in her car for a long time, breathing through waves of anger, fear, and disbelief, realizing that someone had decided her fate without ever asking her, without mercy or explanation at all. When she returned home, Mark was waiting. He asked where she had been. Laura said she needed air. Mark nodded too quickly, relief flickering across his face before he hid it. That night, Laura stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back. She finally understood the truth she had been circling. This marriage was not built on love. It was built on omission, control, and consent she never gave. The house felt smaller now, walls pressing inward, secrets breathing through vents, as if the structure itself had chosen sides, aligning quietly with those who benefited from her silence and feared her questions. Upstairs, a door closed softly, and Laura realized Mark was not the only one who had lied to her. Laura woke to the sound of footsteps moving slowly above her. Not hurried, not heavy, measured. The kind of movement that suggested intention rather than habit. She stayed still, listening, counting each step as it crossed the ceiling. Evelyn was awake. They rarely shared mornings. Evelyn preferred the upstairs, her own territory, separated by a narrow staircase that felt more symbolic than practical. When Laura first moved into the house, she thought of Evelyn as distant but harmless. Now, distance felt like strategy. At breakfast, Evelyn finally appeared. She wore pale gray, her hair pulled back tightly, her posture straight despite her age. Her presence changed the air immediately. Laura felt it settle over the room like a temperature shift. Evelyn greeted Mark warmly, ignoring Laura for several seconds before offering a thin smile. "You look tired," Evelyn said at last, her voice calm and precise. Laura nodded, unsure how much to say. Evelyn watched her carefully while stirring her tea, eyes sharp, unreadable. She asked about Laura's health in a way that felt rehearsed, like checking a box. When Laura mentioned a doctor's visit, Evelyn's spoon paused briefly before continuing. The upstairs hallway remained closed to Laura. Always. Evelyn said it was for privacy, but Laura noticed how quickly Evelyn locked her door, how she flinched when Laura climbed the stairs for laundry. It wasn't privacy. It was protection. Over the following days, Laura began to notice patterns. Evelyn controlled the mail, sorting it before anyone else touched it. She handled insurance paperwork. She knew appointment times Laura didn't remember sharing. Once, Laura found a calendar entry written in Evelyn's handwriting listing a medical test Laura had never scheduled. When Laura asked Mark about it, he shrugged. "Evelyn helps manage things," he said. "She's organized." Organized felt like the wrong word. One afternoon, Laura stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring upward. The house was quiet again, but now the silence felt watched. She climbed slowly, each step heavier than the last. Halfway up, she heard voices. Mark's voice was low, tense. Evelyn's voice followed, calm but firm. Laura stopped, heart racing. "She's asking questions," Evelyn said. "That was inevitable." Mark sighed. "I told you this would happen." "Control isn't permanent," Evelyn replied. "Compliance is." Laura stepped back silently, retreating before they noticed. Her hands shook as she returned to the kitchen. The conversation replayed in her mind, every word cutting deeper than the last. That evening, Laura pretended to sleep early. The house settled into darkness. Hours later, she heard Evelyn's door open. Laura watched from the hallway shadows as Evelyn moved downstairs quietly and picked up the phone. Her voice was low, urgent. "She doesn't know yet," Evelyn whispered. "But she's getting close." Laura's breath caught. Evelyn paused, listening, then added, "If she learns the truth, everything collapses." The line went dead. Laura retreated to her room, pulse pounding. Whatever Evelyn was hiding had shaped this family long before Laura arrived. And now it was closing in around her. She sat on the edge of the bed, replaying years she had never lived, realizing how carefully her life had been guided. Love had been suggested, safety implied, choice quietly removed. Every kindness now felt conditional. Laura understood something else, too. Whatever sickness lived inside her body had roots in this house, nurtured by silence, obedience, and a woman who believed control was care rather than compassion or shared responsibility. Upstairs, Evelyn locked her door. Downstairs, Laura realized the woman upstairs had never been a bystander. She had been the architect. Laura began measuring her days by what her body would allow. Some mornings she could stand without help. Others, she sat on the edge of the bed waiting for the room to stop tilting. The symptoms came quietly at first, polite enough to be ignored, then grew bolder, demanding attention she no longer had the strength to refuse. She kept a notebook hidden beneath the mattress. Dates, fevers, night sweats, sudden aches that bloomed and vanished without warning. Writing steadied her. It gave shape to fear. Each entry made one thing clearer. This was not stress, not exhaustion, not imagination. Her body was telling the truth even if everyone else refused to. Mark noticed, though he pretended not to. He asked questions that sounded caring and offered solutions that kept her inside the house. Rest, tea, fewer errands. He volunteered to manage her appointments, said it would be easier if one person handled things. Laura agreed once, then never again. The second she hesitated, his patience thinned. Evelyn watched everything. She commented on Laura's appetite, her color, the way she held her shoulders. Each observation landed like a quiet accusation. "Weakness invites chaos," Evelyn said once, not unkindly, as if offering wisdom. Laura didn't respond. She was learning that silence was safer. The house adapted to Laura's decline. Doors stayed closed. Windows remained shut. Cleaning supplies multiplied under the sink. Labels turned outward. Evelyn insisted on gloves for dishes, separate trash bags, careful routines. None of it was explained. None of it was accidental. One afternoon, Laura fainted in the hallway. She woke to Mark's face above her, pale and frightened, and Evelyn standing behind him, arms crossed. The ambulance was called, then canceled. Evelyn said it wasn't necessary. Mark agreed too quickly. Laura felt the decision pass over her like a shadow. Later, alone, Laura searched for answers where Evelyn kept them. She waited until the house slept, then crept upstairs, heart pounding with every step. Evelyn's study smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper. Drawers were labeled, files arranged by year. Laura found a locked cabinet. Inside were medical folders older than her marriage, some decades old. Evelyn's name appeared again and again. Diagnoses, treatments, warnings. Laura flipped through them, hands trembling, recognition dawning with every page. The symptoms matched. Her chest tightened as she realized the patterns were identical. The progression mirrored. This was not coincidence. This was history repeating itself, carefully managed and quietly contained. A loose envelope slipped free and fell to the floor. Inside was a list of names. Not many, some crossed out. One circled in red ink. Laura Whitman. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Laura froze, papers pressed to her chest. She listened as the steps paused outside the study door. A shadow crossed the gap beneath it. Evelyn's voice drifted through the wood, calm and certain. "You shouldn't be here." Laura did not answer. When the footsteps retreated, Laura gathered the files and hid them back exactly as she found them. She returned downstairs, shaking, understanding finally settling into something cold and solid. The illness inside her had a lineage. It had been monitored, controlled, and passed forward without consent. Symptoms didn't lie, and neither did the evidence. She thought of the calendar entries, the separate cups, the locked drawers, the canceled ambulance. Pieces aligned with unsettling clarity. This wasn't negligence, it was management. Her life reduced to variables, risks, and acceptable losses. The realization stripped away the last of her denial, leaving resolve in its place. If they believed she would remain quiet, they had miscalculated badly. She would no longer survive by permission, but by intention and evidence alone. As dawn broke, Laura sat at the kitchen table, staring at her notebook. She added one final line beneath the others. Someone knew. Someone always had. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked in response, as if the house itself had heard her accusation. Laura did not sleep. Dawn found her at the kitchen table, notebook open, the house breathing around her. The creak above had become a language she was learning, pauses and patterns that signaled attention. She closed the notebook and decided silence would no longer protect her. She called a number she had copied weeks earlier from a community flyer, a non-emergency line for advice. The man who answered spoke gently, asked careful questions, and suggested they meet somewhere public. He did not give his full name over the phone. He said that was safer. They met at a quiet diner across town. He introduced himself as Aaron Cole, a detective on leave, careful to frame the conversation as guidance, not an investigation. Laura spoke in fragments, choosing words that would not echo back to her house. Aaron listened without interruption, eyes steady, hands folded. He asked about access, who handled paperwork, who scheduled appointments. Laura answered slowly, surprised by how easily the truth arranged itself when someone believed her. Aaron warned her not to confront anyone directly. Not yet. He said patterns mattered more than accusations. When Laura returned home, Evelyn was waiting in the living room. She smiled and offered tea. Laura declined. Evelyn's gaze lingered, sharp and measuring. "Family protects its own," she said lightly, as if stating a rule. Laura realized then that family here meant obedience. Mark arrived later, tense and restless. He asked where Laura had been. She told him she had gone for a walk. He nodded, relief softening his shoulders. The reaction felt rehearsed. Laura watched him, cataloging expressions like evidence. That night, she searched Mark's old emails on the shared computer. Took minutes. He had never been careful. There were messages from years before their marriage, exchanges with doctors, questions about management, risk, discretion. Evelyn's name appeared often. Laura's did not, until suddenly it did. One message stopped her breath. Mark asking if disclosure was necessary before marriage. The reply was brief. Timing mattered. Stability first. Laura closed the laptop. The house seemed to tilt, not from illness, but from betrayal finally named. Mark had known. Not suspected. Known. He had chosen her anyway, or chosen what she represented. Upstairs, Evelyn moved, a deliberate step crossing the ceiling. Laura felt something settle inside her, a calm edged with resolve. Blood was not always family. Sometimes it was leverage. She returned to the kitchen and hid the notebook deeper, adding a single note she would remember without ink. Trust was no longer assumed. It would be earned or it would be exposed. In the hallway, Mark paused, listening. Laura met his eyes and smiled. It was the first honest thing she had done all day, because it promised nothing. Her phone vibrated once on the counter, an unknown number lighting the screen. Laura did not answer, but the message appeared anyway. Advice stands. Keep copies. Stay calm. Do not tip them off. She deleted nothing. She powered the phone down and slid it into her pocket, feeling steadier than she had in weeks. The truth had edges now, something she could hold without bleeding out. From the staircase came the soft sound of Evelyn's door opening, then closing again. Laura imagined the woman upstairs reviewing contingencies, adjusting plans. She welcomed it. For the first time, the imbalance felt smaller. She rinsed her cup, dried it carefully, and placed it back where it belonged. Separate. Ordered. Temporary. Tomorrow she would play the role they expected, ask nothing, agree to dinner, listen. Tonight, she would rest, knowing that family bonds could be rewritten by evidence. As she turned off the lights, Laura promised herself one thing. If they wanted silence, they would have to earn it. And if they wanted loyalty, they should have chosen honesty first. Morning would test every choice she made next, alone together. Dinner began with forced smiles and plates arranged too carefully. Laura sat upright, rehearsing calm, while the house listened closely. Mark poured wine, avoided her eyes, and praised Evelyn's cooking. Evelyn presided silently, chin lifted, measuring reactions with practiced patience. The clink of cutlery sounded loud, almost accusatory, against silence. Laura felt steadier than expected, resolve tightening like a knot. She mentioned her symptoms casually, watching faces shift microscopically slowly. Mark answered quickly, minimizing, offering routines instead of explanations again. Evelyn nodded approval, signaling control without raising her voice once. Laura waited, letting silence stretch until truth demanded room tonight. She asked about the files upstairs, gentle, impossible to ignore. Mark froze briefly, then smiled, claiming organization kept families safe. Evelyn set down her fork, eyes bright with certainty alone. She spoke calmly about responsibility, sacrifice, and choices made earlier. Laura pressed on, asking who authorized tests bearing her name. The room tightened as if walls leaned closer to listen. Mark protested softly, saying timing mattered and disclosure complicated stability. Evelyn corrected him, asserting compliance protected everyone from chaos eventually. Laura realized they spoke as partners, not guardians or witnesses. Her voice steadied as she demanded the truth, plainly now. Evelyn leaned forward, revealing philosophy shaped by fear and order. She described management, risk reduction, acceptable losses, and obedience principles. Laura countered with consent, autonomy, and the cost of silence. Mark wavered, torn between allegiance and the marriage he chose. Evelyn's gaze hardened, authority slipping into threat without volume displayed. She warned exposure would destroy reputations, livelihoods, and fragile peace. Laura replied exposure was already destroying her body and future. The words hung heavy, a verdict pronounced in private here. Mark asked for time, promising answers if patience prevailed soon. Laura refused delays, setting conditions that changed the balance forever. She demanded copies, access, and acknowledgement before morning arrived today. Evelyn smiled thinly, signaling negotiations rather than confession openly now. Mark reached for Laura's hand. She withdrew deliberately calmly tonight. The house seemed to exhale, relieved violence had not erupted. After dinner, Evelyn requested a private conversation upstairs alone immediately. Laura agreed, recording quietly, phone hidden against her spine carefully. In the study, Evelyn admitted knowledge without remorse or apology. She framed necessity, claiming prevention justified unforgivable means always there. Laura asked who else knew. Evelyn named Mark plainly then. A notification chimed, startling them both into silence suddenly hard. Downstairs, Mark paced, guilt unraveling his careful composure slowly tonight. Laura returned alone, eyes steady, voice clipped and firm resolved. She stated boundaries, demanded transparency, and warned consequences clearly now. Mark confessed knowledge, partial truths, and cowardice disguised as care. Laura recorded everything, heart pounding, face controlled tightly there alone. Evelyn descended, expression composed, asserting unity against outsiders always first. Laura countered unity required consent, not management or secrecy anymore. The standoff ended without resolution, tension humming through rooms tonight. Later, Laura reviewed the recording, confirming Evelyn's admission clearly captured. She backed it up twice, labeling files with dates securely. Exhaustion settled, but resolve burned brighter than fear inside her. Laura planned exits, allies, and steps toward accountability carefully ahead. She texted Aaron briefly, signaling progress and danger nearby tonight. He replied to preserve evidence and avoid provocation always now. Upstairs, Evelyn moved furniture, preparing contingencies unseen quietly alone there. Mark slept fitfully, murmuring apologies that solved nothing at all. Laura watched shadows cross the ceiling, counting intentions carefully again. She sensed a shift, plans accelerating beyond her control suddenly. The house no longer hid. It prepared itself tonight fully. Some truths had spoken loudly, and consequences approached without mercy. Before dawn, Laura heard a door unlock upstairs slowly again. She rose quietly, phone ready, breath measured steady firm now. Whatever came next would not be accidental this time anymore. The night had spoken. The morning would judge them all. Above, a step faltered, then stopped completely without warning there. Laura waited, knowing the next chapter was imminent already begun. Silence returned, heavier, charged with impending violence inside walls here. She steadied herself, prepared to survive whatever followed alone tonight. Somewhere, a plan broke from its script abruptly nearby now. Laura stepped forward, as footsteps answered from above at last. Morning came gray and muted, the kind of light that softened edges but sharpened truths. Laura moved quietly through the kitchen, careful not to wake Mark or Evelyn. The house had grown heavier overnight, weighted with the confessions and admissions she had captured in the study. Love, she realized, had shifted quietly into survival. She packed a small bag, methodical and deliberate, folding her few belongings with precision. Clothes, important documents, notebook, phone, copies of medical files. Every item represented autonomy she had not been allowed before. She paused to look at her reflection in the hall mirror. The woman staring back was no longer naive. Her eyes held caution, determination, and a knowledge that she could no longer trust the people who had promised care. Mark appeared in the doorway, carrying a cup of coffee. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice practiced, concerned, but Laura noticed the tension behind it. He had known all along, and yet he stayed. She handed him a smile that was polite but empty, and told him she just needed some air. He nodded quickly, relief flickering, but his hands tightened on the cup. Laura left the house, stepping carefully into the muted morning. The air outside felt different, free but uncertain. Every step was measured, but each one strengthened her resolve. She found a bench in a quiet park, sat, and went through the plan she had been forming for days. Evidence had to be preserved. Contacts had to be safe. Every move counted. Aaron Cole's words from their last meeting echoed in her mind. Control is not yours to take, but truth is yours to protect. That truth was heavy. It weighed more than fear. It weighed more than betrayal. Love had once bound her to Mark and the house. Now it had been replaced by the drive to survive and expose what had been done. Later that afternoon, she returned briefly, claiming errands, slipping inside silently. Mark was pacing in the living room. His composure was cracking. "Where have you been?" he asked, voice tighter than polite concern allowed. Laura answered calmly, keeping tone neutral. She watched his reactions, noting the hesitation in his responses, the subtle shifts of guilt in his posture. Every movement he made was a confirmation of her suspicions, every word a clue she had missed in months of enforced trust. She spent the day gathering what she could, small but crucial items that told a story of the house's control over her life. Each paper, each document, was a piece of armor for the battles to come. Mark offered help, but she declined. Assistance from him now felt like a trap. By evening, exhaustion pressed against her, but she ignored it, forcing focus. Every corridor, every shadow in the house, felt laden with observation. Upstairs, Evelyn moved deliberately. Laura imagined her calculating, anticipating Laura's every decision. Fear was present, but it was sharpened into vigilance. Laura reviewed the files she had copied earlier, rereading confessions and admissions, connecting timelines and actions. Her love for Mark had once blinded her. Now it had transformed into calculation, planning, and endurance. She realized survival required more than hiding. It required strategy. As night fell, Laura prepared a small meal and sat at the kitchen table, staring into the dim light. She thought of the conversations, the hidden files, the recordings, and her own trembling but determined heartbeat. Love had been a luxury. Survival had become necessity. A faint creak from upstairs reminded her that Evelyn was awake, watching, waiting. Laura did not flinch. Instead, she stood and whispered to herself, steady and resolute, "I will not be controlled. I will not be silenced." The house seemed to listen, silent but attentive, as if acknowledging her resolve. Somewhere above, a door shifted. A plan was unfolding without her consent, yet Laura now felt ready. She had learned to move within the house like a shadow, unseen, unnoticed, prepared. Tonight, love had ended quietly, replaced by vigilance. Survival had begun. And outside the window, a branch scraped the glass, a reminder that danger was never far, but neither was opportunity. The house felt different that morning. Quiet, yes, but heavy in a way that no previous silence had been. Laura noticed it immediately when she stepped into the kitchen. Mark was already there, unusually tense, fidgeting with a coffee cup he did not drink. Evelyn's door upstairs remained closed, but a shadow under the frame suggested someone had moved within, awake long before the rest of the house stirred. Laura's instincts had sharpened over the past days, each warning signal amplified by months of observation and fear. She moved cautiously, scanning the room. Nothing seemed out of place, until she noticed the faint scent of disinfectant, sharper than usual, lingering in corners. It reminded her of hospitals, of sterile control, of secrets hidden in plain sight. She tried to ignore it, telling herself she was being paranoid, but the unease had settled deep in her chest. She decided to fetch her notebook from the bedroom, hoping the act of organizing her thoughts would calm the rising anxiety. As she climbed the stairs, she passed Evelyn's closed door. Something felt wrong. Too still. Too absolute. Laura reached the top and paused at the edge of the hallway. The light beneath Evelyn's door was uneven, flickering slightly as if a candle burned behind it. The house held its breath. Then a soft creak of movement stopped suddenly, leaving silence heavier than before. Laura's stomach churned. She stepped forward carefully, reaching for the doorknob. The door was locked. Panic rose in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Laura listened closely and then heard it. A soft, irregular sound, muffled but unmistakable. A thump, followed by a pause, then silence again. Fear and realization collided. Something had happened. Something serious. She ran down the stairs, breath quick, heart pounding. Mark was still in the kitchen, pretending to sip coffee, but his hands trembled as he set the cup down. "Mark," she asked carefully, "is everything okay?" He glanced up, eyes sharp for a split second before sliding back into a mask of control. "Evelyn is fine," he said quickly. "She's upstairs, resting." Laura did not believe him. She felt it in her bones. Something had gone wrong, and whatever it was, it had been contained behind that door. She moved to the study to fetch her phone and call someone, anyone, when she noticed a faint, coppery scent in the air. Blood. It was subtle at first, almost undetectable, but unmistakable once recognized. Laura froze, her hand hovering over her phone. Mark followed her gaze, voice suddenly tighter. "Don't jump to conclusions," he said, though his own words carried a tremor. The sound upstairs shifted again. A floorboard groaned. Laura's pulse raced. She realized she needed evidence, not assumptions. But before she could move, the sound stopped entirely, replaced by an eerie, absolute quiet. She crept to the foot of the stairs, listening. Then she noticed something that made her blood run colder. A piece of Evelyn's scarf, torn and lying on the steps, a trail of droplets leading nowhere. Laura's instincts screamed. She was too late. Detective Aaron Cole's advice returned to her sharply. Observe, document, don't interfere until it's safe. Laura snapped pictures with her phone, careful to leave the scene untouched beyond recording what she could. Each image reinforced the dread forming in her chest. Mark's movements grew erratic. He fumbled with his keys, muttering under his breath. Laura observed quietly, hiding behind a doorframe. She noticed something in his expression she had never seen before. Fear, guilt, and something almost triumphant buried beneath. Suddenly, the phone rang. Laura jumped, heart hammering. She had forgotten she left it in the kitchen. She moved toward it slowly, counting steps, listening. The ring echoed through the house like a warning. She picked it up to find a message. Don't trust appearances. They never tell the full story. Laura's mind raced, piecing together months of manipulation, secrets, and lies. This was no accident. Evelyn's death was deliberate, calculated. She realized that someone in the house had made the decision, decided when and how it would happen. She retreated to the corner of the living room, pressing herself against the wall, trying to steady her breath. The house seemed to close in around her, every shadow now threatening. Upstairs, the door remained closed, holding a final, silent truth. Laura understood one thing clearly. She had been protected by luck until now, but the house had claimed its first casualty. And she was next if she made a wrong move. Her eyes fell on Mark. For the first time, she saw him not as a husband, not as a lover, but as someone complicit in the dark design that had unfolded behind closed doors. She made a silent promise. She would survive. She would uncover everything. And somewhere above, behind the locked door, the house kept its secret. The next step was inevitable. Laura had to know the full story, but she also had to prepare for confrontation. The truth waited upstairs, and it was far more dangerous than she could imagine. The morning after Evelyn's death, the house felt hollow in a way that no one could ignore. Laura moved slowly through the rooms, her body tense, her mind sharper than it had ever been. The previous night's shadows lingered, curling around corners, making every step seem like trespassing. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something metallic, reminders that truth had been stained by violence. Detective Aaron Cole arrived mid-morning, calm but observant. He walked slowly, taking in the kitchen, the stairway, the living room. Laura watched him, trying to measure his attention, wondering if he suspected the house itself held secrets beyond the obvious. He asked her to recount everything, step by step. Her voice was steady, precise, and for the first time, she felt like her words carried weight. Mark stood nearby, his composure strained, fingers tapping lightly against the countertop. Laura noticed it immediately. The habitual calm he carried like armor was gone, replaced by tension, hesitation, guilt. Every small gesture betrayed him. He volunteered information without being asked, a nervous attempt at control. Laura cataloged it silently, noting discrepancies between his words and actions. Aaron listened carefully, then spoke softly. Sometimes everyone around a crime carries pieces of guilt, even when they don't pull the trigger. Patterns show the complicity, not just intent. Laura understood instantly. It was not just Evelyn who had orchestrated control. Mark had known. He had chosen comfort and loyalty over truth. She had been deceived by both. Laura moved through the house, observing familiar details differently. Evelyn's locked drawers, the separate medicine cups, the meticulous schedules, they all spoke of manipulation and control. But now she saw Mark in a new light. His participation was less subtle but no less deliberate. She remembered the emails, the missed appointments, the unasked questions. All of it tied together, creating a chain of responsibility that stretched from the present back months, even years. Aaron led her through interviews with neighbors and old family friends. Patterns emerged, accounts of Evelyn's influence over Mark, his careful avoidance of certain topics, and moments when Laura had been subtly isolated or dismissed. The stories confirmed her suspicions. Complicity was not passive in this house. It was taught, reinforced, and expected. As afternoon descended, Laura returned to the study where she had first found Evelyn's files. The cabinet now seemed smaller, oppressive, but the documents she had copied were her armor. She reviewed each one carefully, connecting names, dates, and medical records. The evidence painted a chilling picture. A family dynamic built on secrecy, obedience, and silent suffering. Everyone had been guilty of something, whether it was omission, deception, or tacit approval of harm. Mark finally broke in the living room, voice low, pleading. "I didn't think it would get this far. I tried to protect you." Laura did not answer. She had heard the words before, but now they held no comfort. Protection without honesty was betrayal. The house had shown her that clearly. A soft sound upstairs drew her attention. The floorboards creaked lightly, almost deliberately. Laura's pulse quickened. She realized that even in death, Evelyn's presence lingered, shaping the house, the people, the story. No one left untouched by what had occurred. Aaron placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "We'll find the truth," he said, but Laura felt the weight of it differently. Finding the truth was only part of the battle. The deeper challenge was surviving the revelations, understanding who had acted intentionally and who had allowed harm to persist. Laura sat in the kitchen, staring at the walls that had once felt like safety. Now they felt like witnesses. Everyone in the house had played a part, and no one could claim innocence. She realized that justice would not be simple. It would require exposure, confrontation, and courage she had only begun to muster. Then her phone buzzed with a message she had not expected. A security camera from the upstairs hallway had captured Mark entering Evelyn's room the night she died. Laura read the words twice, disbelief and confirmation fighting in equal measure. The house had already revealed part of its truth, but it demanded more. Laura understood that the next steps would uncover all the lies, all the guilt, and all the betrayals, and she was ready to confront them. Laura sat in the dimly lit interview room at the police station, the hum of fluorescent lights above punctuating the silence. Aaron Cole stood nearby, his presence steady but unobtrusive, letting her take the lead. The files she had gathered were stacked neatly on the table, each document a testament to months of manipulation, deception, and concealment. She touched the edges lightly, as if reminding herself that the truth was now tangible, real, and irreversible. Mark entered, escorted by 2 officers. His usual composure had fractured. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, and the careful mask of control he had worn for months was gone. Laura felt no relief, no vindication, only a hollow weight settling in her chest. The man she had loved, or thought she had, was now a figure defined entirely by his choices and silence. The questioning began. Aaron allowed Laura to speak first, recounting each event, each discovery, and each interaction that had shaped her understanding of the house and its occupants. Her voice wavered only slightly, carrying the raw emotion that years of suppressed fear and betrayal demanded. She described Evelyn's control, Mark's knowledge, and the deliberate concealment of her diagnosis. Mark's lawyer interjected, attempting to soften his statements, but Laura's testimony was precise, measured, and undeniable. Each fact she presented added weight, exposing a chain of accountability that Mark could not escape. The room seemed smaller with every revelation, the air thick with tension and anticipation. At one point, Mark's voice cracked. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he pleaded. "I thought I was protecting her." I never wanted her. You were protecting yourself, Laura interrupted, calm but resolute. You chose the house over the truth. You chose silence over honesty. And now everything is coming to light. Her words landed like stones in the room, unyielding and precise. Aaron guided the questioning toward the timeline of Evelyn's death. Laura recounted what she had witnessed, the creaks and shadows, the signs that had signaled danger too late. Security footage and medical records corroborated her statements. The pieces fit together, revealing not just intent but premeditation, complicity, and the consequences of lies left unchecked. Mark's eyes flicked to the floor, shame and fear mingling in his expression. He had understood control once, but now he faced its consequences. Laura felt no satisfaction in this moment, only the realization that justice required the cost of truth. Relationships fractured, reputations destroyed, and a family's history laid bare for all to see. When the interviews ended, Laura walked out into the early evening light. The weight of the past months pressed against her, but she moved with purpose. The air outside felt different, lighter, though not free. Survival and truth had a price, and she had paid it. She had endured scrutiny, danger, and the revelation of betrayal, and the consequences would echo for everyone involved. Back at the Whitman house, the walls remained silent witnesses. The empty rooms carried the echoes of Evelyn's control and Mark's complicity. Laura knew she could never return in the same way. The cost of telling the truth had altered everything, redefining the boundaries of love, loyalty, and justice. Aaron approached her quietly. "It's done," he said softly. "Now it's out of your hands." Laura nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. The house could no longer hold secrets. The truth had been spoken, and every lie had been exposed. Yet even as she stepped away, she knew the final chapter had not yet been written. The house, the family, and the choices made within its walls would reverberate long after the court proceedings began. And somewhere deep in her mind, Laura realized that survival and justice, though achieved, demanded vigilance. The darkness had been uncovered, but the cost of exposure was eternal, and the next steps, both legal and personal, would shape the rest of her life. The Whitman house stood behind her, quiet but unyielding, as if waiting to see what she would do next. Justice had been served, but the price of truth was only just beginning. The courthouse loomed before Laura, its stone walls cold and imposing, echoing the weight of every secret that had been revealed. Months of investigation, fear, and betrayal had led to this moment. The truth was finally public, but justice, as she had learned, was never gentle. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Mark sat at the defendant's table, restrained and quiet, the careful facade he had maintained for years stripped away entirely. Evelyn's absence hung over the proceedings, her control gone but still palpable in the empty witness box and the quiet spaces she once dominated. Laura took her seat, her notebook and recordings ready, evidence of manipulation, complicity, and deliberate harm. The prosecution laid out the case meticulously, drawing attention to timelines, emails, medical records, and recordings. Each piece of evidence painted a clear picture. Mark had known about Laura's diagnosis, failed to disclose it, and had allowed Evelyn's control and secrecy to dictate their family's reality. The jury listened intently, absorbing the careful construction of months-long deception. Laura's testimony was precise, steady, and deliberate. She spoke of betrayal, manipulation, and the fear that had shadowed every moment of her life. She described the patterns of control Evelyn had maintained, the complicity of Mark, and the long-term consequences of silence and concealment. Each word carried weight, cutting through the courtroom with the clarity of truth finally unleashed. Mark attempted to respond, claiming ignorance, claiming love, claiming protection, but his words faltered under the undeniable evidence and Laura's unwavering testimony. The jury saw the cracks in his composure, the weight of responsibility pressing on him, and the consequences of choices made in silence. Outside, news cameras gathered, capturing a story of a family torn apart by secrets and disease. Laura remained composed, though inside she felt the familiar tension of fear mingled with relief. Justice would be served, but the path to this point had been steep, painful, and unyielding. The verdict came in the afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Mark's eyes widened slightly, the reality of his actions settling in with irreversible finality. The courtroom echoed with quiet murmurs as the judge pronounced the sentence, a careful balance of law and consequence. The legal system had acknowledged the harm done, but it could not erase the betrayal or the trauma. Laura left the courtroom with Aaron Cole by her side, stepping into sunlight that felt both harsh and liberating. The world had shifted. The Whitman house would remain a memory, a lesson in control, secrecy, and the high price of silence. She had survived, borne witness, and ensured that accountability reached its conclusion. Her phone vibrated with a message from Aaron. A final set of audio files had been restored, including Evelyn's confessions. Laura reviewed them silently, a mix of resolve and sorrow settling over her. The recordings revealed the depth of Evelyn's planning, the meticulous management of health, control, and fear, and the consequences that her own family had ultimately executed. Laura understood fully now. Justice was never gentle. It did not undo pain or betrayal. It demanded confrontation, exposure, and endurance. And while the guilty were punished, the cost of truth lingered, etched into every memory, every scar, every careful step forward. She walked away from the courthouse deliberately, each step carrying both closure and gravity. The story was concluded, but the lessons remained. Trust was earned, deception had a price, and survival required vigilance, courage, and clarity. Behind her, the courthouse stood silent and immovable, like the final witness to a family's darkest truths. The chapter had ended, justice served, but the world remained cautious, knowing the cost of uncovering truth was never without weight. Laura inhaled the crisp air, feeling the freedom of clarity. The house, the secrets, and the lies belonged to the past now. The future, uncertain but hers to shape, awaited with both promise and vigilance. Justice had been done. The cost had been paid. And Laura stepped forward, finally free.